adopt an agenda, I would just like to make an announcement that this is a key meeting based on what's happened the last couple of weeks, particularly 3 weeks ago. After the referendum, there's been quite a bit of comment in the media, quite a bit of speculation out there. That's all, appropriate. People need to make comments and clear the air. But I think this is a meeting that, particularly in the last item in the study session, I think we can take comments and really turn them into concrete actions or definitely move in that direction. So in light of that, we're going to continue with what we have listed here. I would also like to point out that we did send a letter to the town supervisor that pointed out that we would really like to get a formal offer. And in addition to that, I think this is an opportunity as the board for us to really communicate in public about our perspectives, our priorities on what's happened with the land proposal. And I think that will provide, the necessary public discourse as a board to the community. And hopefully the town would also reciprocate. This is something that I think is so important that this is a governance issue, not a discussion that is handled as a simple negotiation, but it's something that people around the table need to speak from their heart and communicate, clear the air, but also start to move it towards some concrete actions. So I just want to bring that forward as an announcement. Motion to adopt an agenda. Mrs. Blaber first, Mr. Casey second. All in favor? Okay. At this point, we'll turn over to the superintendent's comments, but I just want to point out a study session is designed for the purpose of meeting administrative updates to the board. There are no public comments here. Residents may attend the next scheduled business meeting on the May 9th or contact the board by email at boe@chena.org with comments or questions. All questions come into the office of the Public Information Officer and are shared with the board and their superintendent as appropriate. Policy questions, concerns are typically addressed by the board president. Operational questions, concerns are typically addressed by the superintendent and or designee. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Robinson.
Sure. Thank you very much. Just by way of some announcements, you have in front of you invitation to the 25-year club. This year we have a very small number of individuals who had a benchmark only 2. However, it's always a crowd event because people from prior years come back to that. So we will have that event as noted on here in High School West. In short order, you should be getting also an invitation, and I'll mention this in Friday Bulletin as well, for the upcoming high school awards. It's in May, but it's one of those things that I think you want to put on your calendar, May 25th, but I'll send you a correspondence on that. Oh, you have that? Okay, yeah. Perfect. So they're ahead of the game. Just another update. We began the process. Myself, Joe Bush, Elizabeth Wood, began the process screening interviews for high school principal vacancy with Mr. Flynn's retirement. Provide an update in Friday Bulletin, but we started that process. We interviewed yesterday and most of today, and we'll be deliberating a little bit tomorrow to try to figure out how we get down to 3 or 4 candidates to start the committee process. So I outlined those dates and time frames to you as well in Friday Bulletin, but just to kind of keep you in the loop. One other budget road show, I know often board members like to attend those. The next one will be this Thursday at 7 at Tasago. So if you have time to stop by that, a friendly face is always appreciated. And the last comment before we go into the presentation, I was privileged last night to be in attendance at the PTA Founders Day dinner. And Mrs. Mary Blaber and Mr. Flint were awarded the Diamond Award by the PTA for their distinguished service to that. So I want to certainly, I know Mr. Presley was there, Mr. Casey was there for a while, and Mrs. Stevenson was there as well. So congratulations to Ms. Blaber on that award. Want me to continue with the presentation?
Please continue.
So I won't necessarily go pull this up from a presentation perspective, unless the board still have the document in front of you, but maybe I just... this meeting was largely designed around the BOCES budget, and one of the responsibility of the board is to not only adopt the BOCES budget, but actually the administrative component of the BOCES budget. So there's a distinction between the administrative component versus all the respective services that districts purchase through BOCES. And the second component of that are board members, and we're pleased that Mr. DeLallo is one of those individuals, one of 4 individuals up for potential re-election to the BOCES board. So I'm just pausing here. You have the flyer information in your packet. If there are any questions that I could try to address, because some point later on the agenda, there's an action item for both items, if there are any questions that you have.
I can comment on it after.
Or maybe not, if you want to.
Okay. Well, relative to the budget, just, as Dr. Robinson said, the information is there in the packet. But clarity, in terms of the administrative budget, they've actually held the line or actually reduced their operating expenses associated with central administration over the course of the last several years. Nonetheless, the cost of the administrative budget has continued to go up. And this is a reflection of the fact that the administrative budget contains all legacy costs, all health insurance costs for retirees, and it has gone up almost exponentially. And that's the way it is. As far as the basic budget is concerned, they always start with like $125 million and go upward from there because as they sell more services, and that's essentially what it is, provide more services that they receive payment for, then the budget expands both in terms of expenses and in terms of revenue. So it may be another $25 million higher by the end of the year, unlike ours, which is set now and goes forward.
Gary, can I ask Gary a question?
Sure.
Regarding our arts and ed, is that, for the public schools, is that part of this budget as well? Is that all part of that?
That's on the service
That's
side
on
of
the
the.
Okay,
Yeah.
got you.
Yeah.
Not part of the program.
Any other questions? So later on the agenda, the board will be asked to adopt that. I have on here, and next board meeting, we'll be inviting members, people who have submitted and have satisfied the requirements for running for the board to be introduced publicly at that point. However, I just wanted to provide a status on and by now you know, because I sent a note, on the 18th, was the deadline for petitions. We have 4 individuals running for 2 seats. Mrs. Blaber, as announced last board meeting, will not be running for re-election. Mr. Casey announced that he will be running for re-election, and we have 3 newcomers, Mrs. Hoffman, Naomi Hoffman, Mrs. Alexandra Blaze, and Mrs. Jennifer Gleason. So they've been invited to attend the next board meeting, at which point we'll read their bios and go into it. So right now, just giving the board an update that we have 4 individuals running for the 3 seats, the 2 seats on the board. Any question, comments?
No.
And we also, this information will be going out in the newsletter in the next week or so as well. So public information will be out there on that piece. One of the goal areas we've been focused on is instructional goals, and tonight we have a presentation by Mr. Wing and a team of individuals, and Greg will provide some background just to let you know where this campus in a relationship with University of Albany and some of the things that's been happening in Carrigan. So Mr. Wing, you want to come forward? He has several team members with him as well.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Greg Wing. I'm principal at Carrigan Elementary School. And set that back up there. So just want to give a little bit of a shout out to our campus team members and a little bit of the rationale of how they were picked. We had 1 grade level representation from each of the grades K through 5. And then we also had a person from our IST team, who is...
Can you explain IST, Greg?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Acronyms.
Instructional support team, and that would be Chris Byrne, who is also an AIS provider, academic intervention support services, Jillian Karpovich, who is a special ed teacher, and Julie Bernetter, who is our literacy coach, Kathleen Strangis, who's our academic administrator for, you can tell them your whole title, and myself. But then we had also Jillian DeLuke for kindergarten, Caitlin Nagowski, who's here representing first grade tonight, Brian Parker, Kelly Kniss, Marcy Philo, Kathy Palmieri, and I think that's the team. Oh, I do it. Okay.
Just,
Just click.
no, just roll. Like,
Okay. Actually, I'm not ready for that. So, just as a reminder to the board, I gave a little bit of a sneak preview about this, but Carragon's been working with the University of Albany School of Education for this whole entire year to set some high leverage goals for our school. As a research institution, educators at the University of Albany did some very extensive research across all of New York State except for New York City, pretty much, and they wanted to determine why are some schools far outperforming what the expectation of them is. They're like way up here when the curve line was here. And so these schools were called odds-beating schools by the University of Albany. And like I said, they made these site visits. They spent days there interviewing everybody from superintendent, principals, board members, and staff members to find out what is it that's really making them stand out. So they looked at key areas like curriculum, resource allocation, data use, technology, and communication. And they found that using those best practices that they could create a survey to sort of guide where instruction and other areas could improve based on this research that they did. So this survey that they developed was then taken by our school teachers last June. So they looked at the survey, and folks from University of Albany came in, introduced the project, and the teachers took the survey. Then this select group here worked during the summertime to look at the results of the survey and try to see where is it that we're not doing that well or that we could improve. Actually, the results were really quite good of what we were doing. So we had to really dig down into the data to see where are some areas that we could tweak. So there was a lot of discussions that happened over those 2 days. And we have managed to get an incredible amount of things to happen in the very short period of this school year. But first, Julie Brunetta is going to give you an update on the 2-day Summer Compass Institute, and then you'll hear about the 2 goals that we really focused on for the year. And I would like to take a moment to just thank Dr. Wood and Dr. Robinson for supporting this project, because without their support, we wouldn't have been able to do this work. So thank you.
So behind me, it's probably a little bit small for those of you in the back, but it's a summary of results from a survey that took place after the summer 2016 PD. And in a nutshell, it reflects that initially there was some anxiety about the project, but that anxiety was alleviated by the process. Someone described it as a very well-oiled machine. And it was also alleviated by, the expertise of the folks from CASDA and SUNY who were presenting. And just to add my own personal reflection to these as well, it was a great opportunity to experience professional development that combined goals, what we're seeing in a building, with our teaching practice, with the expert guidance of the actual researchers who were there at the same time. So it was an excellent opportunity, and thank you very, very much. Caitlin now will talk about one of the main goals.
Okay, so I don't know if everyone can read it, so I will read the first goal to you. As Mr. Wing said before I get started, one of the things that we decided at our building is through the survey that we took last year and conversations that we kept having at our building with different colleagues is we kept hearing the same thing. There's a lack of communication. There's not enough time to get together and to meet. So one of the goals that we worked on, the first one, is a communication goal. So our first goal was by June 2017, 100% of our staff will increase communication of struggling students with social, emotional, and/or academic needs by bringing educators and other service providers together to ensure the appropriate services and interventions are coordinated. So as I said, we kept hearing time and time again, there's just a lack of communication, there's not enough time, and we decided it might not be at every grade level, but it was happening. So we decided to take this and decide this is a good pathway to make positive changes in our school. So the first thing that we decided to do is we ensured the teachers it's not going to be more work for you. It's just giving the work that we already do a clear purpose, which was great for us. So the first thing that we had is we decided to do RTI transition meetings, which we found through just talking with my colleagues very helpful. So in September, what we did is we met with the previous year's teachers. So for example, kindergarten met with first grade teachers. First grade teachers met with second grade teachers and so on. And what we did is we just discussed students that were struggling and discussed any interventions that were done the previous year that helped that student be successful. And it was nice to do it in September because we found that it gave the teachers an opportunity to kind of get to know the students that were in their class, but also find out what worked for them in the past. So that was really helpful. In our initial meeting over the summer, we thought that it would be nice to do that in June when we had class lists, but we're not sure. We're kind of debating whether we want to do that at the end of the school year or if we want to continue to do that in September. So that's something that we're going to continue to talk about. The second thing that we did is we did mid-quarterly meetings with the classroom teacher and the AIS providers, the academic intervention support service teachers. And what we do is we meet 4 times a year, so we meet mid-quarterly. And it's just for a 15-minute meeting, just to discuss the students, to make sure that classroom teachers and AIS providers are on the same page. Just talk about the data that's collected, the interventions that they're doing, and the progress that the students are making, and then what can be done differently to help get them up to grade level. We found that very helpful, classroom teachers as well as the AIS providers, just to make sure that we are on the same page. The next thing that we did is we have red flag meetings, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with that, it's the students that are struggling in the school. We have these meetings called red flag meetings. It's students that are in crisis, and that's usually made up of the building principal, the psychologist, the counselor, the principal's aide, the nurse, and the case manager. But as we got talking, it never included the classroom teacher. So one of the changes that we made this year is that when those meetings are being held, which I believe there have been 4 meetings and then 2 additional meetings that have been added since spring break, but those meetings will now include the classroom teacher just to make sure that everybody is on the same page, everybody is able to share and hear the same information. And then the last thing that we did is Mr. Wing actually had the opportunity to invite a man named Bruce Bonian from the Leading Edge, which helped us talk about communication as a building. He was in for one of our faculty meetings, and then the teachers kind of had an opportunity to learn how to have a quality conversation, what it looks like, and what it sounds like, and that's all part of our communication goal. So, thank you.
Any questions on this goal before we're going to transition to another goal area?
I wanted to ask a question. I don't want this to sound wrong.
Sure.
I love what you're doing, but what prevents people from doing it previously, I guess, or in other schools here and other places? Is it workload? Is it, you know what I mean? This is what I think there's an expectation
Right.
out in the public or in the parent side that these collaborations are happening all the time, and that's how we get our work done.
I can help you out with that.
Can you? Yeah.
So we have a fairly young staff, so at the school, so a lot of them have young children. And so I might be able to meet in the afternoon, but other people need to go home because they have to get their child off the bus or get them to another child care or these kinds of things. So we had these kinds of things that, well, I can meet in the afternoon, I can only meet in the morning. And so it was kind of catch as catch can, but now everything is scheduled into the day so that there's time provided so that the meetings can occur, like seamlessly without having to worry about people's schedules. So, yeah, I know that it seems like it should just happen, but there are all these little things that can come up along the way that you didn't expect, and it can prevent people from having that opportunity to meet.
I'm glad you're doing this. I think it's great.
Thank you.
Great.
Mrs. Gibb, you had a question?
Well, it was similar to Mr. Casey's. How did it occur before? I wouldn't presume that those conversations weren't taking place.
But it's not a structure.
Okay.
Without structure.
And now the nice thing about this structure, which I didn't go into a lot of detail, is teachers are reporting back. We have invitations, electronic invitations to go to attend the meetings. Service providers have been provided with half-day subs to ensure that the meetings are taking place. With the transition meetings, we have a set schedule in which Mr. Wing is involved in, and then we also have a list of students that we make sure that we touch upon And then for the last one, with the mid-quarterly meetings, we report back to Mr. Wing talking about the number of students, the time, the date that we met, the number of students that we also talked about. So it's just nice to have that documentation as well. That way we can keep track. Yep. Any other questions? No? Great. Thank you.
Good evening. So the second goal within the Compass Plan spoke to digital literacy, if you will. So by June 2017, 100% of staff will use technology to enhance instruction by targeting literacy skills directly connected to the ELA curriculum. So I have to say, I think Mr. Wing plays down his role in the leadership of this piece. These meetings are very purposefully planned, and so to these activities associated with this had to be very purposefully planned. Surveyed for teachers to understand where their comfort level was with technology. Remember when the board started to go paperless and how that first feeling felt? Well, similarly, we had to find out, okay, what teachers are comfortable with Chromebooks versus iPads versus applications versus what activities do you use in your room with a smartboard other than, say, turning it on and projecting something for the students to see. So we had to craft actually a survey initially to say, okay, where is everyone right now? So then we then know where to go forward, relating it to practice. And that's the difference with this goal too. This was very much about teacher practice. And so we incorporated Gail Petrofessa, a lead teacher for technology, along with Julie to help us with instructional models for the classroom in that way. And very clearly there was almost a natural divide between K2 and 3-5. In that K2 is very much more of an iPad-driven scenario. Children in the early grades are very used to tapping and opening and swishing in that regard. And the Chromebooks were clearly making their entryway through grades 4 and 5 very clearly. So Julie took it upon herself in coordination with Mr. Wing to plan in conjunction with our district goals. And that was a great piece to this plan as well. So, you can have many, many goals, and then sure enough, you're divided too far between each other. So Dr. Robinson is very careful to always say that whatever we do within our buildings, it should be connected to our district goals document. So therefore, Greg put the district document out for us, and we found goals that linked in that way. So that's where the ELA curriculum piece came. So why not just digital devices anywhere? We connected it specifically to literacy because the writing component offered an opportunity to connect to our district plan. Having said that, Julie and Gail very carefully crafted professional development using a tool called Write Smart, which is part of our Journeys ELA program. And it's not as if teachers weren't using it, but sometimes you have to just revisit its application and its availability to apply. So Julie did a great PD in that way. That's a writing program. Instructionally, students, there are weak models, strong models, models to be improved for writing. It's projected. The students are able to use tools in that way to identify, to add to highlight, to post. It's really an instructional tool. And in terms of the K2 audience, Gail explored with the iPads lists of applications. They came up with a laundry list, if you will, of applications that could enhance instruction, phonics, phonemic awareness, letter knowledge, reading, comprehension, in sort of a fun, engaging way with the kids as well. So in trying to put those goals together to improve practices and as well as comfort level, build that going forward. And then just the last piece in terms of a summary, we were talking in the very beginning, and I think in the beginning of the summer when we started with our goals, the phrase, you don't have to be bad to get better, came about. And clearly that was the message that Mr. Wing was trying to deliver to his staff. And this isn't a needs-based necessarily situation, but goal setting is a very good practice. And part of those efficacy studies that Mr. Wing referenced in the beginning all use this goal setting, smart, measurable, practical templates in place, purposefully planned, those strategies to move forward. And then they can be reflected upon and changed and revised and going thereafter. So I'll let Mr. Wing finish up as he would like to.
Sure. There's just one thing that I think is really part of the key to this whole success of this project is, as Kathleen mentioned, connecting the goals that we came up through the teachers to the district goals. But the teachers having that sense to help to select the goals that we would be working on, taking on ownership and the implementation of them really is a powerful thing, because they're the ones helping to develop and determine the compass or the direction that we're going to head in. So again, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity, and we're looking into seeing if we can continue for next year with the University of Albany and CASDA. But either way, we've grown so much from this that I think there's some things that we'll be able to do, whichever way we head forward.
Any questions before?
I'm just wondering, you said what will happen in your building going forward. Is there a move afoot to have this kind of migrate to other buildings,
But
other levels?
So I think the lessons learned have already migrated because, quite frankly, things that we create in one scenario, we use in other scenarios. And there's if you want to say, some additional PD components that the Compass Group brings to the table that we'll continue to carry on. But certainly the lessons learned from this is something that we want to be able to extrapolate out. And to a large degree, that's why it's great that you have Julie and Kathleen involved, because they span district-wide positions in every elementary building. And so we're looking to see that. And it kind of goes back to the fundamental piece of the Compass study in the first place. They just didn't want to have, quick fixes, things that processes that systems can put in and internalize. So it's not something that the expert always has to be there in order for it to be done. And you certainly heard it from Caitlin tonight in terms of now teachers are seeing the benefit of it. And so this was one of those initial, I think Julie's comment was right, because I stopped in the library the first day. They had a session in the Clifton Park and so there was people kind of, okay, what is this all about? Is this a judge of our practice? Back to your comment, Mr. Casey. We're doing a lot of good things. We're talking to each other. I talk to my colleagues all the time. But okay, that's great, but is that the best structure to do so? And so we're learning a lot from this and impacts other things that we do, because every building has an IST team. So now how do we reshape IST teams in buildings? Every building is dealing with AIS. How do we start looking at this from AIS perspective? So we're doing our own little micro experiment, if you will, and learning from the benefits of what's happening in Carrigon and translate that to other buildings.
And a real concrete example is the professional development that Julie and Gail Petrofessa did on the Right Smart, because they've got it all set. They can go right to another school with it now.
Mr. Delano.
Yeah. I'm looking at it and I'm saying, this is essentially the professional learning community model, but with expertise and with resources brought to bear that makes that model work very, very well. It's
good enough.
I like the process, and at the same time, looking back as a practitioner, and I'm saying to myself, wow, I'm already feeling close to overwhelmed with what I'm doing already. And where's the time, where's the energy, and so forth going to come from to do it different? And yet, when you actually get into the process, you realize, oh, well, it was kind of insane to be doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results. Now I have a vehicle by which I can be more efficient and more effective in what I'm doing. So you kind of have to break the mold to move beyond that, but the rewards are terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great comments.
Good. So appreciate this, and the proven practice is the thing that we're trying to, quite frankly, we're trying to, why reinvent the wheel as someone already demonstrated it could work, and this group has done a lot of comments. So I appreciate this, and this is one of several type of collaborations that we're trying to tap into, particularly universities, because they have people, that's what they do, just research practices and create great theories, and they're always looking for places to replicate it. And so, quite frankly, it creates an opportunity for us, especially being so close to the University of Albany, and quite frankly, you know a lot of the colleagues there too. So it's been a good experience for Carrigon, and hopefully something that we continue to do.
And a good experience for them too, because sometimes they think, oh, you could just do this and this. We're like, well, wait a minute.
It doesn't work that way. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, guys.
So let me transition. So as we transition here, several months ago, we embarked upon, let me back up. For years, we've been talking about traffic congestion and traffic flow. I think it was probably a little bit, maybe this time last year, could have been a little bit earlier. We made the commitment to say, you know what, probably should do a study because there's a lot of assumptions about things, and it depends on your tolerance. Some people think what we think is congestion is nothing because it compares your perspective. And so we embarked upon a study to really kind of study the traffic flow. And that study has actually expanded a little bit because, and we're waiting, I'm not sure if where's our gurus here? Where are our traffic flow folks? Oh, yeah. I'm not sure if they may have any news to share. Hopefully no news versus bad news. We were informed about a grant opportunity with DOT that had to go through the town because the town had to be the lead agent on it. Kudos to John Scavo, who's worked very well with us over the years on many things. And the team from MJ worked to submit a proposal specifically surrounding the congestion piece, and they can certainly talk about that more. So, gentlemen, you want to come forward and walk through the traffic study? There are certain aspects of the traffic study that almost like the same way we use acronyms in education, they use acronyms in engineering. So they'll be ready to break the acronyms down a little bit so we can understand exactly what are the things that are there.
Yeah, we'll do our best.
You want to move or you want to do it?
I can do it. Thank you. So like Dr. Robinson said, late last year we started looking at the traffic on campus. Initially, we wanted to look at not only the intersections surrounding the campus, but also the traffic flow within the campus. And to do that, we wanted to quantify and assess traffic congestion on these roads and some areas that could possibly be improved and how to improve those. There were some challenges given the campus structure as it stands now. There are 2 roads in the campus with access to 3 roads on the outside with only 4 intersections, so it's a little difficult with the volume of people traveling through campus to get out to the adjacent road network and filter out through to their destinations. The study included the following 3 components. Identify the existing traffic conditions, basically go out and collect the data at the intersections and within the campus. We did that in 2 ways. We placed the tubes on the ground. Some of you may have seen those on campus in I think it was September, October that we placed those, and those collect 24-hour data. We did that for 7 days, and then while those were out, we also counted the 4 exterior intersections. The intersection at 146, the 2 intersections at Moe Road, and also the intersection at Clifton Park Center Road. And then from that data that we collected, we analyzed that data and developed baseline traffic condition levels of service and looked at the traffic flows within the campus. And we specifically started focused around High School East at that point. And then from there, we looked at possible improvements to those areas, what we could do to possibly reduce congestion and help alleviate some of the travel times that people have encountered throughout the campus, especially surrounding High School East. So using the data, like I said, we analyzed it. We analyzed that using traffic analysis software that determines level of service. Level of service has letter designations from A to F, A being the best, F being the worst. Typically, I think you guys are well aware of the A to F scale. The industry standards are level of service C is acceptable, D is acceptable in some urban areas,
depending on traffic congestion and existing conditions, and, right-of-way requirements and a lot of other things that I won't bore you with today. So after that, so we collected data in September between 6:30 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. We did that to make sure that we captured the peak hour, not only within the campus, but also having to do with traffic not associated with the school driving by on the local roadway network. As I mentioned before, we did the ATR, the automatic traffic recorder data. Those are the tubes on the road for 7 days during that period to help support those other numbers and verify the peak hours. Determined that the peak hours were from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. in the morning and 3:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. in the afternoon. The results of the analysis shows for the existing that at the 146 intersection with level service E, the Moe Road and School Drive north entrance, the one where most people use to get to high school east, had a level of service B, and also the intersection into the student parking lot was also level service B. While these levels of service B aren't necessarily bad as far as industry standards go, people who drive through it know that there is quite a bit of congestion there. You get a lot of people all trying to concentrate into that one entrance, whether they're picking up or dropping off, depending on whether it's in the PM or the AM. And you have students coming in and out, and there's many different trips that occur at that location. So, and our general findings were we found a couple critical areas of congestion, like I noted, the Route 146 entrance and the Moe Road campus entrance up to the high school east access to the student parking lot. Given the challenges that I mentioned earlier, our improvements are aimed to alleviate this congestion. Unfortunately, we probably won't be able to solve it completely, but we will be able to alleviate it using certain engineering techniques and designs that we have come up with.
Could I ask you a question?
Sure
So
can.
you're talking about level of service. I noticed you didn't mention safety any place in there. How does that fit in? I mean, as a person who got hit at the Moe Road entrance of the high school a couple of years ago by someone making a turn, the last car trying to make the turn, did you look at any data as it relates to accidents or what, that whole prevention side of things?
Yes, as we looked at the alternatives for these areas, Route 146 and Moe Road to the high school east entrances, we did look at ways to improve safety to help reduce those times when people, what we call driver frustration, where they make a move when there probably isn't enough time to make a move because they're frustrated because they don't have the amount of time to do it. And some of the alternatives that we came up with had those in mind. So traffic safety is always, right there with operational safety and capacity at the same time.
Can I ask another question along that line?
Yes.
I know you always have to look at distance too. When you're looking what Bill's talking about, there are certain distances that you have to have. Do you take that into account too when you're talking about turning lanes and things like that?
Yes, we do.
When you come up on hills or, we don't have hills, but the safety.
Yeah, site distance. You have storage distances that you need to try to stopping site distance, visibility of the signal, and if you don't have that, a lot of times you'll put warning signs or things like that. So all that's taken into consideration at the same time. Yes. Yes, sir.
I've looked at the proposals and so forth. Obviously, they're quite extensive and expensive. And it would be probably very difficult for the district to, based on the fact that we're talking about traffic and not actual classroom impact, at least not direct, to say funds would be spent at that level of magnitude. If it were a grant, great. But I'm wondering about this. as far as I know, there's no attempt here made to prioritize your suggestions, that is to isolate certain things that might contribute to an improvement of the situation that didn't really represent the entire project. For instance, for years now, and one of the things that happened is something I suggested initially, was that east-west bypass out in front of the high school. When you're traveling from the east going west, you have an opportunity to go around the turning traffic. It doesn't go back far enough, so you don't get to sort out the people soon enough, and people still get stacked up. A turning lane coming in, going in the other direction, going east, would also allow you to sort out people turning from those who were going to go through. Those are relatively modest projects, and I'm wondering whether, you have things such as that in mind that we might be able to implement and pick off in lieu of, say, a grant that would make it affordable to go on a larger scale.
So their role is to not necessarily say, do this, do that. Their role is to study. And we've been meeting with MJ and our architects and project manager and facilities people for the past, 2 months, 3 months. And one of the things that we didn't, when we ask people to study things, we don't want to bias the study. So we want them to collect information, offer here the best ideas on the different pinch points, if you will. And then at that point, some point, we then have to make, be it prioritization based upon funding or otherwise, or based upon the critical nature of things, to do one thing versus others. So we've had a lot of those conversations already, and the ideal, and again, I'm not going to necessarily go into details, so you're going to walk through the details in the second year. The ideal would be if we had appropriate funding to do all of them. And so I mentioned the potential of the DOT grant. If that comes through, wonderful. If that happens, a lot of these things, if not all these things, can happen much faster than not. Later on, I'm going to mention a capital project piece. If you recall, about a year or so ago, we laid out a plan to go to 2030. One of the components on one of those plans was looking at traffic study, because we had started a study. We figured if we're going to put a study together, we might as well think about how do we potentially fund some, if not all those things, through a capital project. So those are the things that after we go through this analysis, and we'll prioritize the same way we would do from a budget perspective, general fund budget development perspective. What are those things that we can effectively do? Not only because it's not necessarily if it's not cheaper, but what are those things that would be most impactful within a moderate cost constraints that we may have at that time. So that's like the next phase, if you will. So tonight, we didn't want these guys to be biased by that and thinking, well, the district really only want to do this, so we're only going to focus on this, versus bring all the ideas, and some of them we may think wonderful, some of them think it's not feasible to do, not necessarily because of cost, because there's other factors.
I have a question going back to the sort of the safety perspective. We're talking about safety, we're talking about distance, sight distance, for cars. What about pedestrian traffic? Have we taken that into consideration?
So let me do this, because a lot of this is going to be addressed some
Okay.
schematics that you may not be able to pick up from some of the things here, because that was also a piece of it as well.
Yeah, and Mr. Delisle, I think?
Yeah.
Yes. Some of your questions will be
Yeah,
answered
addressing this
in
too.
the next two slides.
Oh, okay. I
So
thought
if
you
we
had
could let me
kind
get
of-
through the next two slides and then ask your questions, I think
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
things will become a little
And
bit
not
more
only that,
clear.
if we get the grant, they're all get done, hopefully, So it's
Yeah.
about whether DOT issues the grant to you or not.
So, in continuation of the new the Route 146 intersection, as some of you know, the school drive coming from the west is very close to the intersection at 146. Creates a safety issue. Some people, I've been driving to campus for the last 11 years, being a coach here. So I use this quite a bit. So it's not just from a study perspective, also from a personal experience, that it's very hard to see people turning on from 146 before you need, especially if you're turning out left. So one of the suggestions was to move the road a little bit further south, away from 146, to give you better distances to see cars and much more time to see the cars coming from Route 146.
So that's the existing road is the pink,
Correct.
and the existing walkway is the pink walkway piece, so you can see, and the transition is, so 3 and 4, the new proposed, 1 and 2, the old roads turn into, open to green space.
Right, it's hard to see it, but 4 is actually pointing to a new walkway.
Yes.
Two
The
to go-
multi-use
two
path
goes
would
to
be
four.
rerouted on the south side so that people wouldn't have to cross the road and it would still connect over.
And the north arrow's pointing at, across the street at Shen Methodist, is that?
Yes.
Is that, okay, so that's where that.
Yeah, so 146 is kind of what I was.
146
Yeah,
is
it's to the
just
north.
outside the
Yeah, okay,
picture.
yep.
All right.
Correct. So beyond that, we were going to add turn lanes, lengthen the turn lanes off of the road to the west as well, to allow for people who are going right and left a little bit more room. And then additionally, we were looking at increasing the storage along School Drive leading up to the 146 intersection. That will allow more right turns by increasing storage for the left turns and hopefully decreasing the total queues altogether and allow more of those left-hand turns to be safer because they're further away from 146 and also not trying to butt into the existing queue. So this would remove approximately 480 feet of the existing road. We'd extend the right lane about 300 feet to just before the curve. Again, I want to mention that these are concept level designs at this point. A lot of things will be determined once the project goes to final design. We haven't really gotten into the details quite as much, but we know that these are possible and the exact lengths and things could possibly be adjusted when this does go into final design.
You looked at the fact that 480-foot linear feet is now being shortened quite a bit. It's almost that, when you're there in the morning, that 485 feet is almost like a storage area. So you lose some of that, but you're getting the advantage of a better turnout.
You do, but you're also gaining it by adding the second lane
Stacking
at
piece
the
on
same
side.
time. So if you see the dashed line and the solid line, the white lines
Okay.
on the new road number 3, where now the right turn lane is very
longer.
short.
Yeah.
It will be much longer, and the left lane will be much longer, so you should make up some of that.
So you separated the traffic earlier. So before, people who were waiting to turn right, they were in the singular lane and was back in the verses, they could be in a separate lane, so more people stack behind them.
Right? It actually starts, but it actually starts right at the curve.
Yeah.
See the dotted coming out way up there is where they separate.
Where now they separate about half that distance.
Yeah. In a single lane.
Yes,
Yeah.
Because the right lane's very short, you can probably fit 2, maybe 3 cars in there.
exactly. People going to gravel.
Yeah. Exactly. So, those are the improvements that we were looking at here. Now to High School East. The proposed design here was much more extensive. One of the initial things that we wanted to do that, through driving around as we travel, you see what other schools do and things, and you notice that a lot of schools have isolated their drop-offs away from their student parking and away from their bus access. And that was one of the things that we really wanted to focus on and figure out, okay, how can we separate the different trips coming into the school? Separate the students from the drop-offs and the pickups, and separate those from the faculty and the bus parking in the front. And after that, we decided to look at some options. A few of the options that we came up with, to Mr. DeLallo's comment, number 7 is the second lane coming in all the way from Moe Road up to the tennis courts, with separate turn lanes for the access to the front faculty parking and the student parking, and also the new student drop-off area, which I'll discuss in a minute. Number 1 on the map is a new entrance/exit adjacent to the tennis courts. That is to separate the people coming in turning right in the morning and allowing people to turn left out in the afternoon, and separate those from the people coming in what is now the main entrance. And that will help alleviate the number of conflicts with people turning left into the student parking lot. Number 2.
Before you go on.
Sure.
Plus, one of the side benefits to that additional entrance up top, if you're ever here at a concert or game, it's one way out, and it's absolutely painful. And so we're always concerned about that from an emergency perspective all the time. If we ever have to evacuate very quickly, it's everyone going to that same bottleneck, and so creating two access out so traffic could go right towards more traffic could go left and go around the campus towards 146 becomes even from an emergency egress piece of it that we're looking to see if that will. So it's more than alleviating traffic; it lends to that emergency capacity as well.
Number 2 in the picture. So in this treatment, what we wanted to do is isolate the front circle and allow that for pickups and drop-offs only, and visitor parking. So we isolate that from the student parking and also from the faculty lot, and that would be that entrance's only purpose at that time. There would be no cross connections between. We would put up some curved islands and maybe some fencing or something to help prohibit those movements. And further separate the different trips coming into the campus and arriving at high school east.
So, because when you first explained it to us, I wasn't sure exactly what I was thinking. So, if you think about the current turn now to come to the circle, the first part of it will be there, but it stops. We see that number 4, the 2 arrows. So we'll stop that. So that would only go to the student parking lot, and we'll create a new road beyond the. In fact, where's the clock tower? So on the other side of the clock tower to extend around the circle that way. So that's that difference. So one road will go for only people who are going to student parking. The other road, the first entrance, we have an entrance there now. Having that become the entrance and have that go around the circle, and then we're talking about potentially then having 2 ways out of that. One way you want to talk about to the right, and then one way going back to.
Yeah, there was a scenario where we did have it go into the faculty lot and have a connection through there. There was some safety concerns with that. Students passing through there, and faculty for that matter, passing through that traffic. So we came up with, right about where the one arrow for the 4 goes to that orange area, you'd see that it splits, and that would be one-way traffic around the loop. And you would come back out, and it would be 2-way traffic from there back up to School Drive. And that would be, like I said, just for pickup, drop-offs, and we'd maintain the student parking, or the visitor parking, rather, that's there today. The 2 pink areas adjacent to that, the number 3s, those are the areas where we will add raised islands with curbs and possibly some other type of treatment, maybe some landscaping or something, to prohibit the connection from the student parking to the drop-off, and prevent people from coming into the student parking lot and going up through and finding another route out. And the same thing would happen on the front faculty parking lot side. We would come up with some type of raised median or fence combination or landscaping or something to also separate those as well.
So one of the things, I don't know if you want to get into this, what we refer to the faculty lot, we see the number 9 and 10 pointing. That's in the afternoon, that's the bus pickup as well. So one of the proposal was to push the lot back to create a better scenario for buses. So we want to look at that, again, it's concept at this point, to look at that area to basically replace the lot one with the other. Because initially we were thinking about, can we create another out option? But the concern we have is the potential of pedestrian and vehicle traffic in the same area, which meant to. So that's why the orange is still kind of there. There's kind of jagged orange as a potential thing for us to think about as we move forward with this, because we do have the secondary entrance to Mole. That's that pink area that's currently the secondary entrance to Mole right now.
Yeah, and that leads me to number 4, which is possible modification of the parking lots. That could include a number of different treatments. And then number 5 would be to move the current second access to Mill Road further south towards the property.
Before you go into that, let me just mention, so because I know a board member asked about, does this lend to possible additional parking space? When we got into this, it wasn't about parking capacity. It was about traffic flow. But just like anything else, once you get into it, start digging enough, you see some potential opportunities. And so 2 potential opportunities. One, that was just pointed out, when we block off that road, so to speak, the existing road to come to the circle, that can become potentially additional parking spaces, as well as the top jagged orangish color by the tennis courts. Right now, that's parking, but it's kind of graveled. And so part of the thought is, if we're going to do all these modifications, be a great chance, because, again, once things are paved in line, you get more capacity, versus when things are gravel, kids are just pulling in and just parking all over the place in in a very unorganized fashion. So those are two potential areas that we could pick up some additional parking spaces. That wasn't part of the initial study, but as we saw these as potential opportunities, if we replace one thing, what do we do with it? Do we create additional? So point out to the board that we haven't looked at how many spaces and all those kind of things yet, because it's all concept at this point.
Correct. And let's go back to number 5 there. We were going to move the south entrance to Mill Road further south towards the property line, and that will do a couple of things. Right now, the storage for the left turns into campus is very short.
So coming up Mo.
Going north on Mo, turning left into the second entrance. Very few cars can fit in that space right now. So the idea was to move the south entrance further south, and the town was okay with this concept. They agreed with it to a point. And then that would also increase your storage and allow for more vehicles to get into the left turn lane and help prevent other people trying to get up to 146. That will allow them to get up there a little easier. And the green lines just above that is the replacement of the existing shared use path that is along that road. So we would be maintaining all of the path access.
As well as looking at potential additional path
Yes.
to the front.
There's
none, that's what I'm saying. So the top green is potentially a new path.
Leads me to number 6.
Yeah.
Existing, the path ends at the tennis courts and connects into the student parking lot. While we were out there collecting data and putting down our ATRs and things, we saw that there were quite a few students that would walk out the north entrance. So our idea was to extend that to 146 and connect it down so there was a full connection of all the paths in this area to give the students a safer place to walk and things like that.
Plus, quite frank with you, if the walk-in, we see kids walking at what I call the primary entrance, and it's a barrier to get across that to get to the other side, because you have traffic coming from 4 ways, and I hate to say kids on as a student to look 4 ways, because we only taught them to look 2 ways. And so this potential of having them being able to walk down and walk to the crosswalk where we have the flashing light becomes also a safety piece. But these, again, some I don't want to call them ancillary, seem like they weren't important, but these are some things that came out of, okay, if we're going to do that, then this creates an opportunity to potentially do some other things to enhance not only traffic flow, but also pedestrian flow.
Yeah, I was going to say, and that, to the tennis courts, that walkway that comes around the tennis court, that was actually, if I'm right, funded by DOT in a previous grant.
Yeah.
And it's still out there in that parking lot. From an issue of safety and having clarity of what the path to follow is, that would be a great advantage.
I just have a question on the moving the one entrance down further on Mill Road. It's near our property line. Is there a street back there? Is there going to be any resistance,
Actually,
you think? Is it too
well,
close to
there's
that?
actually a street and houses and then our property line.
Okay.
So there's a separation. And again, as pointed out, I mean, before we do any of these things, extensive survey and all those type things have to take place. And because the whole notion of this is creating more stacking on 146, not necessarily even the campus, because this just create a better flow, on Mill Road, not necessarily on the campus road itself. Because that back entrance is still large to use only for dropping off or for bus pickup in the morning. In fact, they're parking in the back.
And if it is close to houses, the benefit is the peak times that they'll be used is when it's less likely to bother people.
Well, I'm not where I just figured I'd
Yeah.
You never know.
Yep. And we already talked about number 7. Number 7 would add 2 lanes coming into campus up to the tennis courts to give people traveling to the western part of the campus a bypass lane and separate turn lanes for people turning left. Coming the other direction, we proposed to increase the storage exiting campus more. I don't remember exactly how much it was, but more than doubled at least, and that will also help in the same regard as the work at 146, and for as far as storage and allowing right-hand turns and things like that.
Yeah, that's number 8, right?
And that's number 8, correct. And number 9, well, with number 2, that would take away the entrance into the faculty lot. So we were proposing adding another entrance off of the side road at number 9. And number 10 was possible modification to the parking lot, including possible expansion to help with bus loading and unloading and increasing the safety and capacity for that.
Sorry. Ian?
Going back to the beginning, so I didn't want to interrupt you. So it always interests me as to why you do only 7 days of study, and you pick the beginning of the year. What's the thinking behind that? Why only 7 days?
It's standard practice.
That is standard, okay.
It is standard practice in the engineering industry to do that. We do 7 days so that we kind of get a good feel for some of the fluctuations that do happen over a full week. To do much more would be kind of cost prohibitive, actually, in a lot of ways.
You definitely have to get Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Right. That was my next.
Usually, because you don't want to do Monday, because kids can't get out of bed and mom and dad have to grab them in.
Right.
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is usually the norm.
Yeah.
And then we just put out 7 because you get the Monday, Friday, you get the weekend to see what traffic's going on the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if there's an event that obviously changes,
Yeah.
If there's a football game Friday night, the numbers skyrocket in this area, as opposed to Friday night this week.
And also, a lot of times, your roadway network isn't designed for special events. A lot of times, that's why you come up with special event treatments and special event traffic plans to help with those times when you have increased traffic. Otherwise, again, it's cost prohibitive for the school or town or whoever is doing that particular project to make it worthwhile.
And these counts, just like for doing a count for the town,
Right.
you definitely do it when school's in session.
Yeah.
You don't do it this summer, you don't do it during break, so
Yeah.
the 21st, you're in school for a couple weeks already.
Yeah, and the reason why we waited till the 21st was to try to, hopefully things had kind of leveled out by then,
Okay.
and you don't get the initial rush, because a lot of times you try to design for, the majority of the year, not, I'll use the holiday as an example for parking lots. You don't design parking lots for Christmas shopping. You design parking lots for the remainder 11 months of the year. Otherwise, again, it's cost prohibitive to do it, because now you're looking at twice the parking when only half of it or less is being used 11 months out of the year. The same applies to any project involved with traffic engineering and engineering in general when it comes to transportation.
Mrs. Baker?
Couple questions.
Okay.
Really, really surprised from an anecdotal standpoint that student parking departure at High School East is level A. Am I reading that correctly? This is student parking, right? And school drive. I'm amazed that that's level A. Honestly, it seems to me like it's worse leaving at the end of the day than it is arriving in the morning in a lot of and especially from a safety standpoint. They're just, and I can certainly see where the second exit by the tennis courts would make a big difference there, but is there a potential that there's something wrong with that? I'm just amazed that that's not a problem.
That's why I shared in the beginning, perspective is such a interesting thing, because the reality of it is that wait time is actually not that long.
2 years. It's long.
That's what I'm saying. It's a perspective thing. It's truly a perspective thing when you think about standard. The reason why it's so long is because people come 45 minutes before school starts and sit there and wait. But once kids get in cars and start transitioning, it's not as long. And so that's a piece, back to his Christmas example. We can't build it based upon, if you want to say, habits that are now there because of some of the other configuration pieces that we have. And so that's a big part of it. And so if you go to the flow now, you'll see two different flows. First of all, kids can't leave until all the parent limousine traffic leave. And then you see the student parking lot start to empty out. So there's actually a evolutionary flow. No one told anyone it happened that way, and it happens in a very sequential way. So that's why I understand what you're saying, because when you're there, you think, oh my God. That's why we want to study it to say, okay, this compared to what becomes the question, and subsequently then, what are the things then that we look to really invest in if they're so far outside of the norm versus things that, okay, might be inside the norm, but there's a potentiality is always there for a conflict of vehicles and coming from different directions. And that's where the separation of the student parking lot became a part of that piece of it. How do we separate that one flow from the parent flow? And will this miraculously, you could drive in and drive out? No, it probably won't necessarily change that, but it changed the dynamics of how traffic moved on the campus, which is a big piece what we're trying to impact.
So the other thing is, this is a potentially DOT grant, and you looked extensively at our footprint, but would there be anything on the town side, traffic signals or otherwise, that would make an impact to our benefit and to the town's benefit as well?
Well, I can speak to that as well, because when was this argument? When they put the flashing signs, if you see flashing signs now on Moore Road, we spoke to them quite a bit about signage, because that was also the same time we had the other grant.
That was that last grant.
So when we had when we had other grant, we were talking about location of traffic devices, and that's when the crosswalk went in, some additional flashing signs and things of that nature to slow the pace of traffic. So we've gone through that conversation quite a bit, actually, because we had some funding potential to do some other things, and that's when actually that flashing light went in as a result of that last grant as well.
So there's nothing else that would be helpful on that side?
I mean, I can't say there's nothing else, but at this point, we haven't revisited that since the last time we looked at this piece of it. If we make modifications to Moore Road here, this could be potential opportunity because the flashing sign is now up about here. Do we create different signage? That's a possibility as well. But again, we haven't gotten to that detail of engineering yet.
I was a question similar to Mary's, but is part of this grant process, is there, and working with John at the town level, is there some town money in there as well for these kind of things? I mean, I remember the last time when we did that, I think the grant money that we got through DOT actually paid for those flashing signs and flashing lights and the signage and the crosswalk, because that was like a sidewalk grant that we got that time.
And so the last grant had for lack of a better word, a matching component in it. And so there's always a, if you want to say, method to the bigger madness here. The last grant, at the same time, you remember we were doing capital construction project on campus as well. And so Augie Freeman, at that point, in fact, ran herd on that grant quite a bit directly with DOT, because we wanted to let them know what we were thinking about doing anyway in terms of repavings of roads and things of that nature, and they saw that there was a great marriage to build in those kind of things and use one thing to account for that matching component. This grant, I think the biggest issue to this grant is more so the time. If we get the funds, it's 18-month turnaround time?
18 months to start construction.
Yeah. And so the good thing about that is with DOT, we're dealing with DOT regulations versus we're still informed the state education department, but our approval process now goes through DOT. I think it's good. I don't know which one is faster or slower.
Let's give it a try.
So it's a different approval process similar to the last 300, and I think it was 360,000 we got for the trail system. And so there's a different approval process. So that's one source, and we're hoping, who knows, we may get an email right now to say, sorry guys, good. However, one of the things that we want to have in our possession was an actually study with some potential options. We just didn't want them to give us a count on how many cars, because quite frankly with you, we probably could have done some of that, but we want them to say, considering the fact that what are some alternatives, back to Mr. Delato's question in the beginning, what are some alternatives? So as we look out from a capital project perspective, what are some of the things that we want to do, need to do, could do? Related to this, we have a signage project underway. And so some of the signage components could be, I say some, we're going to strategically look at that, could be delayed based upon how the potential of some shifting and things of that nature. Because last thing, we want to put up signs in areas that roads no longer exist or a new road will be. So I share those are some of the things behind the scenes that still needs to be developed and kept watch as we go through the process. And the ideal is and I think DOT grant was what, $5 million?
Roughly.
So the ideal is to get that, then quite frankly with you, we can then jump, both feet into a design phase. Absent that, we have a study, and then we have to start thinking about fiscal opportunities to move forward.
And further on that, there are some treatments here that you could do piecemeal, if you will.
Yeah.
You don't have to do it all at the same time, and you can do it by
Exactly.
pieces as Dr. Robbins said, as funding allows.
So I'm a driver in training, much to my parents' dismay. However, I was wondering, I know construction, well, especially in the winter months when you have to clear snow, that can sometimes generate a big distraction for students, especially with all the equipment. And I was really wondering, maybe, I know you mentioned it might take 18 months or so, and I was going to maybe suggest, especially during the final time, a lot of the construction equipment, and of course I don't know what times of day you might be working. However, that can be a huge distraction, especially for the classrooms, with windows that are peering out. I know, it might seem silly, but some slight distractions and like a testing environment can really maybe throw some of those things up. So, just from a student perspective, I think taking things like that I'd encourage that.
Great point. So what we'll do, Cameron, we'll figure out which classes you're in. No, but typically with construction, most of our construction actually takes place when we have minimal occupancy period. And particularly when we're doing road construction, I mean, when we did paving, a lot of it was summer after hours because, one, we don't want to shut down campus roads when there are a lot of people who need to be on campus roads. So those are things that we take in consideration often in terms of what's the impact on the overall environment, if you will, of the campus.
Okay, but you say overall during the school day.
It could be school day, after school. The campus is always alive. And so we have to take that in consideration all the time.
A big part of it would be during your summer vacation.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, as Dr. Roberts said, you're not at school at 9 o'clock at night if they work a night shift. When you're sleeping, they can be working.
Yeah. The camera might be still here at school.
It could be like a snowstorm, though. Most snowstorms, you're not at school and you show up and the snow's removed. So, yeah.
Good.
Same idea.
So we'll keep you informed. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Delato.
Yeah, I'm feeling neglected over here.
I'm looking, I didn't see the wave. I'm sorry.
I noticed. I didn't mean to be hostile previously. I certainly, that was not my intent. There was a matter of priorities. But, the discussion, particularly Bill and Mary's, relative to participation in the town and so forth, to me is important. I realize you don't design for the worst case scenario. I probably experienced the worst case scenario at the beginning of school this year. It took me 15 minutes to get from Maxwell Road into the high school parking lot. Literally, I timed it, and it just seemed like forever. And it was very apparent that under the stress of that particular day, that the source of the problem was the campus, and it was backing up from there onto the road net going in. But there are also contributing infrastructure issues in the community. You have a right-hand and left-hand turning lane off of 146 onto Moore Road, and at one point, it's a two-lane road. And consequently, that's a choke point. So we may free up the flow here on campus, which is certainly desirable, but if we don't also have an opportunity to work with the town to redress some of these other issues, then it's not totally counterproductive, but it isn't as effective as it might otherwise be. So I think it's very important that this be coordinated and work together.
And we did work with the town of John Scotwell on this scenario, and to your point, there's always going to be a choke point.
Yes.
It's like you're just kicking the can, if you will. I mean, we might fix this one, and the next one might be on 146. You get out there, it might be at the light at, whatever, north, wherever it is. It's traffic, unfortunately.
That particular example reminded me of going from 4 lanes on the Jersey Turnpike down to 2 as you approach the Delaware Memorial Bridge after you've been from 4 to 6 lanes. It gets backed up.
Yep.
And to Dr. Robinson's point on perspective, my wife's from Boston, so I talk about traffic around here, and she's like, this is nothing. Because I grew up in northern New York, so 4 cars at an intersection was a traffic jam in my town, so it's the whole perspective.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. The next presentation we have is, as the board knows, we do exit surveys after each referendum, and we try to have some similar questions, so we have some comparative benchmarks to look at how one election compared to the next. And so Ken is going to walk us through what I call some of the demographics and cross-tabulation data that we can do comparisons with, just so the board can have some perspective on that. You want to explore it a little bit?
Yeah, go to the next one. Well, we had 1,000 people, over 1,000 people fill out the survey, and that sounds like a lot. It was actually one of our lower participation rates in our survey. The start version, the 15% there, was that low at that time because that's the year that the paper ballots erroneously got thrown out. We're usually over 20%. So that was kind of a low, I'm not sure why, participation rate. Next one. As far as yes and no, it's funny because typically more yes voters fill out the survey, and this year more no voters filled out the survey. So, but it was pretty close to the actual vote. The actual vote was 70% 30, 70% no to 30% yes. As far as communication, what is really interesting in this is that those getting their information from district resources, which the district resources, you can scroll down, all the dark purple are district resources. Keep scrolling down. Yeah. We're significantly lower in this vote, and the people saying that they get their information from media was significantly higher. As far as the district communications provide you with good sound information, that again was a reversal with much higher at the sometimes rather than the yes in past votes. As far as the town information, it was pretty consistent if you look across the years. I mean, it goes up and down in different towns, but I would say that was pretty consistent. The age category, what we saw is 60% of people voting were over the age of 50. Now, since I'm in that bracket, I'm not going to say older folks, but we saw fewer in the under 50 voting than do in the normal budget vote. We also saw a lot less people with kids in school voting, only 34%. That's a huge drop. And if you see, the 60% of the voters had no children under 18. And we also had fewer employees vote as well. Typically, I mean, it's not a huge drop, but typically we're in the 10%, and it was 6%. As far as the vote by town, the towns are pretty consistent, other than Waterford. People in Waterford actually more voted yes than no.
But that's only like
Waterford is like an
that's
extension.
1%, right, of the
Yeah.
population?
Yeah. It's,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's really the outside of Half Moon. I mean, that's Half Moon to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Waterford to me is, I know it's their address, but to me, those are people that live
Yeah,
in.
but
I'll
it's
be
a
honest with you, a lot of people
small
don't even know what
percentage of
town they
people.
live in.
Right.
I mean, a
You're
lot of
right.
times people write in Rexford, Jonesville,
I'm
they
sure.
don't even know that's
I'm
Clifton
sure.
Park. So, okay. No, I'm serious.
Elnora.
Yeah, Elnora, they'll write in, yeah. As far as the respondents, these are cross tabulations. Vote by respondents with children versus no children. Again, there's a slight difference between people who have kids, the breakdown of the vote versus people who don't have kids.
Okay, so that's, I need clarification. They voted yes, or yes, they have children?
No. People who have kids in Shen schools, 39% of them voted yes, 61% of them voted no.
Okay.
Of those that said they had no children under 18, 21% voted yes, 79%
That's the
voted no.
last comment.
So they're more likely to vote no without children in school. And as far as by age category, it reads the same again. The people who were in the 18 to 24 bracket, 23% of them voted yes, 70% no. Any questions?
I gotta tell you, Kelly, I'm just thinking as I looked at these numbers a few times, and I mean, I voted, and because I'm just thinking the lines were so long that day, that we probably lost people because nobody wanted to stay around and do that.
Could be.
The survey,
Could be.
one of the
Survey.
things I noticed was the lines were so long, it wasn't a matter of they didn't want to do it, it was you couldn't
You couldn't get there.
Yeah.
Agreed with that.
The lines
Agree
to
with that,
take
too.
the survey?
No,
Yeah.
the lines to vote
Oh.
were blocking.
Blocking the
access
survey to get
the
over there.
survey.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
that explains it, yeah.
You waited long in line, and you had
Yeah,
to pick
you
up
have to pick
somebody
the
or
time.
whatever, so you didn't have the time to do
Yeah.
it.
And it was raining, it was just, we had a few contributing factors.
So, having had this information, what do you do with it from a communication standpoint? Have you had the time, or just?
I just always, I like to compare from year to year. I like to see who's voting, where. Like, one of the things that this tells us is that perhaps district resources aren't reaching a certain population in the community. Like knowing that, especially with this, when a certain population was particularly interested in this issue, and they're saying that they're getting all their information from the media, that tells me something. So I just kind of look at it. I look at everything and, try to figure out what you can do better.
The only thing that I saw that popped out at me that I thought was especially noteworthy was the role of the older population without the kids in school. Because
Yeah.
that popped out. That was
Right.
definitely a different pattern of behavior than we normally observe.
Well, and also I look at why weren't parents interested in this topic? Because that was a significant decrease.
Unless they were, and they voted, but they didn't fill it. So
Fill out the survey. Right. Yeah, that's why it's good to have the longitudinal too, to see over year by year by year. Because you're right, you can't always draw conclusions on one vote.
And out of the 1,000+ that took the survey, how many left comments, and do we have a
There
run on
are,
comments?
well, basically, there are over 1,000 comments.
I mean, basically, anyone who filled it out.
Yeah.
Wrote
What a
something.
comment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's pages.
And what we're trying to do is, I mean, quite frankly, some of the comments are, I don't want to say people comment on necessarily, whatever. What we're trying to do, and we will at some point, to try to see which comments are instructive for future actions. Similar to the question that Mrs. Baber said, what does this tell us? This vote was unique in many ways, well, unique period. first time having a permissive vote. And so what we try not to do is read too much into certain things versus, okay, when we start looking at the trend line again, as we move forward, does this represent a change in trend lines for even budget votes or capital project votes and things of that nature? So I think that's a piece that, so it kind of put that mark, okay, is this the start of a new trend line or this was an anomaly based upon this unique situation? So those are kind of things that back to the piece of it. The reason why we try to have the consistency in that piece of it. So we can try to say, okay, is this telling us something or just unique to this situation, and it falls back into the normal pattern as we move forward? Because we even look at, to go away from this a little bit, we even look at things like years when we have contested election for board members versus years that we don't. And do we see any significant departures from those years versus other years? And so those are some of the kind of, if you want to say, inside information we try to grab from it to say, okay, in past years when we've had a contested election, what were some of the things that were driving a higher number of voter turnout? Was it purely the fact that we had a contested election, or was it because there was an aggressive campaign? And we've had some of those in the past couple of years. And so those are some of the other factors that sometimes the numbers don't bear out. And even this one, Kelly pointed out, the number of responders to the survey was relatively low in comparison to past years. And so, again, we have to take those things in because it's I don't even want to call it a forecast, but just to give us a flavor or trend of how things may progress as we move forward. Last budget vote was a perfect example. We saw the trend of no vote, yes to no, huge increase, but the trend of voters went down. So we started wondering, okay, is this going to be the new norm? And that's something to check. I don't know if May is going to be reflected of that because of the recent April vote, or do we have to wait till 2018, 2019 to see if the things normalize? And so those are kind of things we try to take and not draw any early conclusions on any of this stuff versus just use it to help inform some of the more practical things, such as, Kelly, how do we deal with the media? Or should I say how we provide, I don't want to deal with the media, Glenn is here, I think I'm dealing with him. How do we provide information to the media? Because the media has changed, because now, quite frankly, they're using the same tools that they're using. They're using Twitter and Facebook and all those same things that before we were the only source for those, but now they're using the same things. So how do we see that as a complementary, or should I say an extension of our communications, recognizing that they're in the market to communicate? So how do we see that as, so how do we interface differently becomes a question as we move forward as well.
I think there's some predictability in this, though. Predictability in terms of the, maybe, I'll say, probably an aberration, but where you have outside advocates.
Yeah, changes.
So that's where the media piece kicked in.
Yeah.
And that was more active than what we could ever do, or could legally do, let alone ever want to do.
Yeah.
When you have a weekly newspaper and the change in the way the Gazette covers this area has made, I think, a significant difference as to where people get
It'll
information.
be interesting to see at the budget vote if it
will be. Yeah,
goes back to the
absolutely. Yeah,
norm or
yeah.
if it's.
But you saw advocacy, and we don't have it on here because we only went back to 2011. But if we have data, we have different data points for a long period of time. But even when we start looking at data on number of people who vote, and you start looking at, I think it was the pool vote was a huge one. And so huge advocacy. The splash group was pretty aggressive. And quite frankly, without the splash group, the pool vote would have went down because it fell a couple times before that. And that was the name of the group, Splash. And so those are some of the factors we have to think about. What are the contributing factors in any of these situations? And so I use that for example because that was prior to me coming here. But I started looking and saying, why was this so high? And asking the question, and you find out, it was so high because, okay, well, if those things aren't taking place now, we shouldn't anticipate 10,000. We should be falling back down to this baseline. Good.
Thank you. I'd like at some point to have a chance to look at, once you sort through comments just to get a sense of what comments were.
Yeah, we will. And I'm not going to promise you next week.
No, no, I'm not.
Okay. We will. We will.
It's a lot, some of them are paragraphs, so.
Thank you.
No, we will. The last presentation, I shared with, I'm not sure if I need to stand for this or not.
Maybe?
Oh,
respond.
No,
Okay.
that's fine. It gives me a seat to sit in.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I shared with the board some information pertaining to what, for my term, legal options to take as we look to move forward. And essentially, there are three sections of education law that speaks to the conveyance of the property. And the board is very familiar with 1804 because that's the process, the law that we use for the competitive RFP. And that process speaks to fiduciary responsibility, best price, and things of that nature, and having some type of competitive process. And so it could be RFP, it could be a broker, it could be a bidding process. And so at that point, the RFP was the process that we used twice under 1804. There's some limitations to all these laws, and that's why they're different. There's some kind of and it's important that the differences become more important than the similarities. So, for instance, under 1804, it talks about selling on credit, and by basically, if someone's going to look to buy it, they have to have all the money to pay for it. Probably pretty much simple way to recognize that. 1804, and I just use reference to the town because just for a point of reference, if we're selling to a municipality, it couldn't necessarily bind, we as the seller couldn't say you can only do this. It's based upon the proposal that they submit and also the RFP that we submit, and if they're accepting of that RFP. So it's a technical piece of it that because if we put out an RFP and said RFP, these are the conditions of the RFP, someone's accepting the RFP with those conditions, and those conditions are part of that situation. Or if they have something else that goes beyond that deems to be beneficial to the town. And we already know of the 10% piece, which translates to the permissive referendum. Under 402, 402 speaks to the highest price obtainable. Again, legal language is just interesting. I think lawyers write things so they could only be the only person to figure it out because some slight difference in terms. And so when you're talking about the highest price attainable, it's not as strict as, okay, this is the fiduciary responsibility, and so we have a valuation of property. We have two valuations of the property, and it averages about $1.5 million. 4.2, contrary to 1804, does allow for the credit purchase piece of it. However, the backside of that is that under 402, we cannot bind so in other words, if a municipality buy the property today, they can go back and sell it for whatever reason they want tomorrow. So that's the other restriction or condition, if you will, under 402. 402 requires a public approval process to go through. So basically, the board proposal is shared, provided to the board. Board reviews the proposal, agrees with cost constraint, things of that nature. Board pass a resolution. That resolution language that's passed by the board becomes the language for potential referendum, public referendum. And the same thing with 4.5, the similar referendum piece. The difference between 4.5 is 4.5, they use the term with or without consideration. So there's some greater flexibility for the board to think about value of property. One of the things that it speaks to, though, is having providing access to the appraisal to the public, because what it's trying to play a guard against is collusion in situation where someone go out and say, I'm going to sell it to someone for $1, but the valuation of it is 1.5, and the public don't realize that the valuation was 1.5. And so that's piece to make sure that the sale is on the merit of the sale and not anything else. And so that's where 4 or 5 speaks to those pieces. And again, 4 or 5 has the referendum piece as a part of it. So one of the things then I started thinking about, if we have options, and again, this is not a plan being proposed to the board, it's just discussion of options as we move
Can I
forward.
ask you real quick?
Sure.
Does 402 lock you into a certain amount,
402 speaks about highest price
highest price?
attainable under those situations.
all right.
And so I mean, the bottom line is, all these proposals is going to be contingent upon, say, all these options are going to be contingent upon what's the proposal that's in front of the board to consider. And so the board has some degree of discretion, I'm going to use that term, in the conversation, recognizing that we do have a price point by the evaluations, by the appraisals that's on the table, so they give you some ballpark range when you're thinking about what's fair, what's reasonable in that situation versus something that's not fair, because it has to go to a public piece in terms of what's fair and reasonable as well. From a proposal, so I kind of broke the next piece out into 3 different components just for clarification purposes. They're not in any particular order or priority, just break them out from a clarification. And so one of the things we spoke about last time, and I mentioned to the board because, and Mr. Presley alluded to it in his opening comments, there's been a lot of comments in newspapers and media, but no direct, so to speak, people saying that this one is willing to do this one is willing to do that. But, you know, as often said, soup isn't soup until it's soup. You can have all the ingredients on the counter, but it's nothing but a bunch of mess on your counter until it actually turns into something. And so one of the things I did, sent a letter, and you have a copy of it to Supervisor Barrett and the town board members to let them know that if they do, in fact, have an interest in the purchasing the property, we're willing to entertain and review and facilitate conversation with be it the board or representative of the board, town representative of the town, whatever they may look like at some point. So kind of get the ball rolling in a more formalized way versus in what's happened now, a lot of chatter outside of the governance bodies, both the town and the district, as well as outline some of the legal stipulation because, quite frankly, they have their attorney too. So their attorney go and do their legwork and see what's feasible for them and not feasible for them as we move forward. So that's the proposal piece. And I put this other footnote on here because that technically, you know, people have been talking about the town of Clifton Park. But when you think about Kings Park, for example, Kings Park is owned by the county. So there's a potential. It's unlikely that another municipality would want to buy land in another town. I'm not sure. I'm sure there's some law that prohibits that somewhere, but I didn't even go look that far. But from a county perspective, that's also one of those things that's out there as well. So it's kind of wanting to share that perspective with the board because that's one of those quirky things that came up in looking at some of the legalities and kind of talking about municipalities. But what does that mean? The actual place where the land is located, but we also know that even go as far as the state potential, again, probably more far-fetched versus the reality of town of Clifton Park being the best contender. From a board perspective, some consideration, again, assuming that there's a viable proposal on the table, so just everything's based upon that assumption, the board doesn't have to consider what's the best route to pursue the sale. Is it through 402, 405? Or quite frankly, the board could say, you know what, we want to go to 1804 and try to hand that a more competitive process. So all the options are available to the board. It's not like if you do one, you can't ever do that again. But the reality of it is, it seems more at this stage again, probably going to be something that's going to go through 402 or 405 as a more viable alternative than not. A resolution of action from the board would have to be made that would drive then the resolution for the referendum, establishing referendum dates, all those type things as we move forward. A suggestion I want to put on here only because we're like in a limbo right now with our project that was approved over a year ago, and we thought approval of the actual project was going to be a lot faster, and so as I started looking at our facilities plan that I shared with the board about 18 months ago or so, thinking that, oh, if we're going to go through, because it's a pretty extensive process to put on a referendum vote. And quite frankly, if we're going to go through that process for a special referendum vote, because that would be, that's what it's called, because outside of your cycle of your normal vote piece, by law is called a special referendum. Do we look at a possibility of trying to link that with some of the capital project needs that we have as well? So just food for thought to share with the board. As I said, it's not necessarily a proposal, but food for thought as we consider those kind of things. Clearly, the public referendum items fall in place, from the legal notices to all other things that we have to provide as we move forward. So I guess I just put those as a reminder, because sometimes people fail to forget about the mechanics behind the election process and all the things that goes with that timeline.
Real quick question. So I want to make sure I understand from an option perspective. Looking at those three options, specifically 402 and 405, is it safe to say that at this point the ball is in the town's court, that before we can move forward with either 402 or 405, we have to have a
Yeah, I mean,
proposal? Is that
yeah, you
fair to
can't,
say?
you have, yeah, this is action based upon having a proposal
Okay.
in hand. And so, yeah, so that's why I noted on here is the formal proposal piece becomes, because that's what the board is reacting to. The board is the seller of the property, and quite frankly, the property now sits in the public domain, so it's not going anywhere, so to speak. And so if or when a proposal is made, we will be, quite frankly, analyzing that proposal against the respective thing, and then the board has to think about what are the conditions, stipulations they would like to see, in which law allows for those conditions and stipulations. So this is not one of those, oh wow, here's a great proposal and we're going to do this. We have to think that whole thing through, and then once come to that determination, make sure all parties are on board, the potential buyer and the district being the potential seller.
So the proposal,
And I'm not-
let me finish, sorry, just
Go ahead.
let me finish on that. So the proposal doesn't necessarily have to be a complete, every single line, I's dotted, T's crossed,
No,
as much as, okay, we are interested, this
No,
is.
it's not an interest, it's not an interest letter.
Okay.
It's a proposal. Here's what we are looking to purchase for.
Okay.
And so I want to make sure that we don't misunderstand. This is not, all of a sudden I get a letter in the mail, hey, with a number on it, and that's the proposal. Any of these things is going to require conversation with the parties. And because one of the things that the conversation has to talk about, what are the expectations of both parties? Not only from a price point, but expectation otherwise surrounding. That's why, so it could be a conversation talking about, well, can we, the term used here, can we pay on credit? Well, if you go that route, there are some conditions that go with that stipulation. Expectations around price points. And so it's not simply, so when I say a proposal, it will eventually get to something that has to be codified in writing. But I imagine that if, and again, I don't want necessarily even reference the town of Clifton Park, because I'm not speaking for the town of Clifton Park, but if we have a municipality that wants to engage in that discussion, initially it has to be, okay, well, we're willing, and some, it could be something that may actually, quite frankly, something in writing to say, here's what we want to consider. But at some point, it has to be a formal proposal, because that formal proposal will drive the resolution language that the board has to adopt, which goes to the voters. So there are other steps within other than just simplification here.
Just two things. In your letter, now, he could, the town of Clifton Park, there's no time stipulation here, so we could be waiting.
Yeah.
So that's worrisome at least in my opinion. The second piece is, when we start these conversations, and I'm just going to throw it out there because I think it's important, and we had talked about it before. I know we have a sense of how we usually do things, and we look to leadership to lead these conversations, whether it be we're hiring a new principal or whatever it is. I'm just putting it out there for discussion. When we get there, I think it would behoove all of us to have a larger group in those initial discussions. And I'm not talking 10, 15 people. I'm talking 2 or 3 that can see both sides of that situation.
So I would say I don't disagree with that. I would say the difference between when you have a competitive bid process versus now is, quite frank with you, there'll be more conversations right here. Because the competitive bid process had some limitations in terms of what you can share, when you can share. So there'll be more board conversations, same way I would hope, quite frankly, there'll be more town public conversations about this matter, assuming if that's the case. So there is a shift in terms of how things transpire as a result of different stipulations of the law. Does that make some sense? And that's why the slide here, I said that everything, back to Mr. Gilbert's comment, is conditioned upon, do we have something that we're reacting to? And that piece of it, and I just mentioned the capital project piece as something for the board to consider if we go down this road, regardless if it's 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, whatever that stipulation is. If it's outside of, actually, let me back up. If it's too far down the road, we probably have a capital project piece tied to the May 2018 budget anyway, because of how the backlog of things are transpiring with the state now, where you'll approve in 1 year and it's 2 years later before you can actually even get any work done, which is grossly problematic when you're trying to stay on a cycle, so to speak. So I wanted to start going to the last slide, because the last slide was just a reminder to the board that we actually had that capital project plan, unless you have a question about that.
One thing is, it seems like we're constrained to a public referendum, so that's this third column. And our opportunities to do that are potentially this October or next May, and that should sort of, it's not a hard deadline, but it's sort of a softer deadline as far as lining this up, where when we do receive a formal proposal and go through the consideration process, eventually voting on a resolution that then allows for a referendum.
So the time frame kind of give the board a rationale behind it. I'm thinking most people probably make the assumption. So this rationale, assuming that within the next coming week, month or so, whatever, we are to be at a proposal phase. It's called that. And the reality of it is, we would never do an election in September. Start a school year, it's not ever a good time. Reality of it is, we try not to do any elections in December, January, February, because you always run into weather factor. Ideal time, to be quite frank with you, or potential ideal time, is the same day and date that we have national elections. Because if you, right now, there was a movement afoot to limit capital project votes on election votes because of the North Colony situation recently, and there was some legislative push, didn't go anywhere. So I share that time frame because if you look at most places, and you're looking at Shen, we do a lot of our special elections in that time frame, because you're out of the madness of the start of school, and you're still within that fair weather sequence, and recognizing that we have a fair number of our constituents that live 2 different places based upon weather factors. So we never want to have a situation that by the nature of when we time things may disenfranchise certain population from not, or run into the risk of having a vote on a awful snow type situation. Rain, we deal with, big snowstorms, whole different dynamics. So that's the rationale. There's no science behind it other than when we look back at when we have done special election, typically in that October, November timeframe. Any thoughts, comments, questions?
Just, and this might be an obvious thing, but to play devil's advocate, we're all assuming that the town, based on what we hear, is going to put in a proposal. They very well may not. Then we go back to the drawing board and figure out what's the next step in looking at others.
If the town doesn't, I'm not speaking for the board, but if the town doesn't, the board made a gallant attempt to sell the land through a competitive process. Vote proved otherwise and negated the past resolution. If the town doesn't submit a proposal, or even doesn't submit a viable proposal for that matter, the board has no obligation to say, oh, well, you have to go and do something with it, to be quite frank with you. That's another discussion phase by the board at some point to figure out, do they do anything with it, including the potential of going to back into a competitive bid environment. So I say that because I don't want people to feel as if I don't feel people as if the board has to do anything. The land now is in the public domain, using the term that's often said. And so that's one piece I think we need to be aware of, in the sense that the option that was exercised didn't translate. And so, quite frankly, you look at, see if there's another viable option, and if there is, we analyze it and see if it's worthwhile pursuing. And if not, the good thing about land, it doesn't go away. In some cases, you're right, the value goes up as it sits. So, yeah, Mrs. Blair.
I think I'm where you just described in this whole process, and I've heard a lot of the comments in the public feedback and media, and something that you just said really resonates with me, an expectation of the parties involved. So I am at the point now of thinking people have spoken, and for whatever reason, the district's goal, I think, needs to be clarified, that the purpose of selling the land in the first place was to dispose of land we could not use, to raise funds to purchase land that we could. Correct? That was the destination that we were trying to get to. So we were going to dispose of 34 acres to generate resources to purchase usable land elsewhere, and the third part of that is minimize taxpayer impact. So as Kelly indicated, the district goals were either not heard, disregarded, or ignored based on the survey exit results, and other interests came forward with other agendas. Some people wanted a park, some people decided they didn't like the potential owner of the land, sort of leapfrogged over the question, which was, should the district sell the land to purchase to maximize or minimize taxpayer impact? So I don't mind that the letters have gone out. I think it's good that kind of exploration has begun to occur. But what I would like us to consider now is the 34 acres. Is it still what we said it was, land that we can't use? Or does it have a purpose? Can we use it for playing fields without huge mitigation costs? If there's something, let's go back to the drawing board and develop a plan if there is some use for that land. And if we do that, we would need to recognize that we may also need to find resources to purchase land elsewhere, because we would make use of the land, but we wouldn't have the resources that we said we needed. Is that still the case? And I think we need to decide consciously that the land is still determined to be of no use to the school district. And if it's not, we do something with it. If it is, I'm not opposed to selling it. We need to look at the rationale of the sale. We talked about the Futures Committee recommendations, but that was 2011-12. And I was a member of that committee, and I felt then, and I continue to believe, that the recommendations were well researched. People who entered the discussion midway in this process may not know that background, or that didn't fit their narrative, so they didn't embrace it. But regardless, I think it's worth reviewing the Futures Committee recommendations. If they hold true, the reality remains that we need to continue seeking a suitable parcel to purchase and funding to complete that transaction. And I say continue because this board and previous boards have made no secret of wanting to purchase land. We've walked property. We've walked property that would potentially work. We've walked property that would not potentially work. So people who entered the discussion in the middle may not be aware of that.
Mary, you know what?
I'm going to finish. If we determine that we can't use the 34 acres and we still need to look for suitable building sites, and the 34 acres should be sold to raise funds and minimize taxpayer impact, then we sell the 34 acres. Sell. People need to clearly understand that the school district taxpayers are representative of multiple municipalities, each deserving fair economic consideration. I will support a sale that is economically fair to the taxpayers of each municipality, compliant with education law and town zoning requirements, and fair market value. We need a strong process, and we need communication. Live and learn. Whatever happened with communication is no fault of Kelly's. It's an evolution of communication that took on a life of its own that we need to acknowledge, recognize, and use moving forward. I've heard people say in whatever means they're concerned about the outcome of the budget vote. I don't believe our voters are vindictive. I don't believe that that's an issue. I think that our community still believes in the school district, and I still believe in our community. I don't think that the budget is at risk. I think people who've been around for a while would understand that this board wants to be able to continue to be well-rounded in our discussions. We don't want to be forced to focus on budget because of vindictive behaviors. I think our process needs to be even more deliberative and with communication, with analysis of need, with analysis of the state of the land, whether or not we can use it, and always, always, always what is right for kids. That is what we do. Thank you.
Mary, you know what? I kind of feel like you got a lot of emotion going there, and
I don't.
You're very clear. No, you're very clear, and I just want to be clear too. You're talking about people that came in the middle of the process. I may be one of those people that came in the middle of the process, and I stayed very quiet during this whole deliberation. But I will tell you, you talk about suitability of the land. There's one thing that didn't happen here, and it's called a seeker. You need to understand what the quality of the land is before you can go forward with that. It is a pricey concept to take on, but you really do need to understand what kind of land you're dealing with, and that's really the only way to do it. And I don't know, I'm interested as to why Kelly is brought into the conversation. I mean, Kelly does her job. Kelly does a great job. I think, we just need to settle in on here is what the public did. We put it out for a public vote. The public spoke. It is what it is. I think all my colleagues sitting around this table here is very focused on the children at hand, and that has never changed. What happened here is we had different people with different ideas going in different avenues, which was, to me, disparaging. So going forward from here, we should make educational thoughts going forward. And the first thought, if you really want to know what that land is, it's a seeker. That'll tell you. But I heard a lot of emotion coming from you.
Okay.
I feel bad about that.
Understood. I think it's important for us to sort of air out, as you mentioned, 2 weeks ago, it's important for people to air out their opinions respectfully, and I think we've done that on this particular topic. Are there any other comments moving forward? Gary, go ahead.
Yeah. Responding to your email suggesting that we share where we're coming from relative to this thing, I gave it some thought. Talking about priorities, and I didn't confine my priorities to the land alone because I thought you said something about educational priorities. So here's what I have. My first priority is the passage of the annual budget that provides a quality education for the kids. That's the first one. I'm going to talk about the disposal of the land first because this is the issue that is in the forefront right now. But I also will talk about some what I consider to be educational priorities after I've done so. Okay. As inconvenient and frustrating as it may seem sometimes, resolution of an issue sometimes takes more time than anyone would like. You've experienced it, I've experienced it. And certainly the disposition of the district land, I think, is one of those examples. Within the options available to us under the law, observing the board's responsibility to taxpayers and the future, I believe the district should proceed expeditiously, working with the town of Clifton Park towards the land becoming town property. Now, the process, however, will take whatever time it takes. And there is no guarantee at the end of this whole process that we will reach an agreement, at which time I think some of the proposals that Mary was talking about come into effect. For me, and I'm not talking about for the board, for me, it's necessary that we receive a fair market value for this land. At this point in time, the best figure we have for that is $1.5 million. I would have a very difficult time considering transfer of land from the district for anything less than that, because I feel that that's been the established fair market value. Now, proceeds from the sale of the land shall be used for the purchase of land in the town of Half Moon. I think we established that right from the get-go. I don't know how it got confused, whatever, but that has been the priority, and I think it remains the priority. And because that is the area where we are experiencing the most rapid growth, and we will continue to have the most rapid growth. It's important that we pursue this goal sooner rather than later, because I believe evidence will show that developers are buying up the land as a way of making sure they're going to have land to build on. And a sizable piece of land is involved in anything we would want to do. I believe we should be trying to acquire land big enough, not for a single school, as some people believe was our intent, but for several. Essentially, a Shen campus east, if you will. Now, I realize that this may sound like, why are we going there? Well, think about our predecessors, the people who bought the campus we're sitting on here, and part of the land that we're talking about possibly disposing of. At the time of the purchase, some probably 50 years ago or more, I think probably most people looked at it, what? Perhaps it seemed excessive at the time, but for me, the future is not 5-10 years down the road, but potentially much further down the road. Who knows what our full needs will be? Though, relatively speaking, the land is cheap, but it becomes less and less available with the passage of time, thus acquiring the land while it's still available. So I think the conditions for continued growth are still there, and I don't think they're going to go away. Now, as far as, I guess I would say one other thing. To me, while we've been talking about all of the various options, 1804, 402, 405, for me, 1804 is off the table. All that would do is to go that route right now would be to antagonize the hell out of our voters. So I realize we have to talk about our options, but I don't think that that's productive. I think that should be off the table. As far as the other two options are concerned, again, not binding the town or whoever is the recipient of it to using it for a public purpose is counter to the expressed vote of the people in the referendum. They want that land locked in and protected. So I think 402 is not really a viable option for us. That leaves us with 405. Only issue there is that I really do not want to give that land away. I want us to get full market value for that land, because we have a very good reason for wanting that money, and we need to go forward with that. So now, this is not on topic, but it was as I understood. That was educational objectives. And these are the ones that I'm concerned about. I mean, we're talking long-range stuff when we're talking about selling land and buying land, but this is stuff that affects our kids right now, not in the future, whatever. Specifically, these are some of the things that I would put emphasis on. Enhancing our effort to meet the growing needs of our students in the area of mental, social, and emotional health, with appropriate services and supports to the students and their families. Continuing to emphasize the continuum of services for students who may benefit from programs and services despite the fact that they do not fall conveniently into a category or classification or meet a specific benchmark. We need to redouble our efforts to serve more students that may benefit from our successful alternative education program. We should try to do more with early exposure to CTE, career and technical education, as an alternative for students whose interests and abilities lie in areas other than traditional academics. We must continue to integrate advanced technology into the classroom to increase learning and into other areas of the district operation to increase productivity and efficiency. We should continue to emphasize the importance of professional development for all, including non-instructional staff, as a means, again, of increasing effectiveness. And one that's been on my list of things that I would really like to see us look into, not necessarily what we're going to do, is that the district will, in fact, investigate and report back to the board on the pros and cons of offering the International Baccalaureate program. Those are my educational priorities.
Right now, one thing is that we have a very robust goals process that a lot of those things get discussed and brought forward at the right times in the year and in the budget cycle. I think what we really should look at is, relative to this study session presentation, I think the context of...
I was trying to respond to it. I understood your message.
Okay, but my mistake. Yeah, my mistake. We have some choices in front of us, okay? My sense on this is that this is a governance issue. This is what boards are supposed to do. It's not a management issue. It's not something that the superintendent or the supervisor of the town should be driving first. I think respective boards, our board and the town board, should be talking about this and airing it out and doing what boards do best, which is discussion around the table and figuring out what are the priorities, what are different perspectives. In some cases, there may be different groups, and if they can agree and discuss it, you can combine your priorities. And then you get a firmer level of consensus. Before we go any further, any comments from other members? I know the three of you...
I would like to.
Go right ahead.
Comment. So, I want to do a little education before I give comments. An education on the term fair market value. Fair market value, and I'm not, this isn't an opinion. I do this, and I hire people to do it. The term that relates to that is highest and best use. So when we got those appraisals that were $1.4 and $1.5 million, they were based on the latest zoning that the town had approved and an assumption on the part of the appraiser as to what the possible uses would be and what the rate of return would be. And that's how they look at comparables and say this 34-acre site in the middle of with access to the Northway and all that, and they run all that together. They look at the latest stuff that's happened up and down the Northway, and they gave us those numbers. I'm not picking on you, Gary, but I'll say you because I'm looking at you.
Yeah.
So you put an impossible thing here with highest and best use, or the appraisal that we have. The appraisal we have is for TC3 zoning over there. But what we want to do, or I propose, and I think we want to do, I think the public wants to do is, in layman's terms, we want to sell somebody a car, a new car, but we want to say you can only use it between here and Latham. I would say, but I'm going to spend a lot of money on that car, so I want to drive it all over the place. No, you can't do that. This is our rule. And if we say to the town and restrict use to recreational use,
Public purpose.
the highest and best use is it drops. The highest and best, and in fact, we're saying to them, the highest and best use is recreational. And that value isn't $1.5 million. I mean, the appraisals we have are 2014, as I recall. So there may be some movement on those, but highest and best use isn't, and the current market value isn't 1.5. Once we tie their hand behind their back and say you can only use it for park purposes. And I think, you ask what priorities, I think we need to say that in our conversations with the town. I think the public has said to us, they expect that 34 acres to be used by the public for park purposes over time.
Interrupt for a second?
Sure.
I think the town should figure that out. And the town board should be talking to the key stakeholders and say, okay, what do we want to do? Because they're the buyer.
I agree.
Because when you're the buyer, you don't want to be restricted in where you can move your car. You basically, you buy it. And so I think that if you're the town, you say, as Gary mentioned, put a red X through the 1804. It's not going to happen. Town, figure this out. And my sense is that, we're being very transparent, being very candid. We're on videotape. The town's also on videotape. So there's a level of reciprocity between both boards where we can be respectful. And also, I think, do it during our meetings here, because we're running this meeting, okay? They're going to run their meeting, but we can observe it, and a lot of people in the community can observe as well, and then make their opinions known.
Bill, may I
Sure,
respond a
sure,
little
yeah.
bit? I understand what you're saying. To a certain level, I accept it. I don't believe in public negotiations.
Well, I know,
This is the problem here.
I know.
But I would say this is not a negotiation yet. This is defining your key principles. Use the term strategic planning, Deanna. I would say it's not policy, but what are the core values within this board as to how we want to bring this forward, knowing that we have a lot of legal stipulations, and we're the seller. We might be a motivated seller, but we need a motivated buyer. It happens to, right now, be looking to be the town of Clifton Park. But they've got to motivate themselves. Which column do I pick? Okay? And knowing what are these stipulations, that should drive their thought process. We shouldn't do that for them. I'm a citizen of the town of Clifton Park, but I'm not involved with that board, and I probably would look forward to hearing from what they're talking about, okay? I don't think this is something that the superintendent should be jumping full speed into. I mean, the town supervisor should be jumping into, because from my perspective, they're going to be voting on presenting this like we're going to be voting on accepting this. And this is a board governance issue versus an executive issue.
I don't think they voted before. I mean, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I mean, not in a public session.
But I would argue that was one of the major downsides of how that proceeded, because it did become a discussion between the town superintendent, excuse me, town supervisor and our team and our supervisor. And I think you were involved as board president at the time.
Yeah.
And I think that may have led to sort of a sense of lack of transparency. I think the message I'm picking up from all of this is the desire for transparency. Now that we're in this era of modern social media, a lot of comments can float around on Facebook. You can have a newspaper article go without overnight describing this. People didn't have that for 10 years ago. And so it's important on boards to say, have this discussion, sort it out, get to a level of consensus, and then see what the other board says, knowing that this is the path forward that they have to align to. And I'm not saying I'm trying to force them, we're trying to force them. The state education law defines these things, as Oliver's pointed out. Did that help? Or?
Well, I disagree with you.
Okay.
I think it's not their choice whether they pick education law 4 or 2 or 4 or 5. I think it fits into our setting what our parameters are. And if we say our parameters are limited to public use, then that takes 402 off, and I think that's our right to do that. We may disagree on that on the board. I think you asked what priorities are. Somebody said to me, a pretty well-known person in town said to me, commenting on us, on the district, it said, I'm going to give you some advice. Follow the whole law. And I thought they were talking about this. They were talking about HOLE law. When you're in a deep hole, stop digging. And my judgment, as a district, we are in a hole with the public. Whether or not we consider this vote a no confidence vote or not, we made our recommendation, and it was soundly rejected. And our survey provides some information, but the best survey of all was 2332, 5442, 70%. I think the public said more than 2 to 1 that the land should be used for a potential park. It's worth more than the best offer dollar. We claimed, and DBL claimed, that this was the best offer, and the town rejected the best offer. The people did. So our task is to quit digging, I think, and to start collaborating with the town. And I appreciate, Bob, very much that when you talked about land sale options at the beginning, you talked about what concrete actions can we take. Because I think there's an expectation that we will take concrete actions, not that we'll punt this down the road. And we expect the town of Clifton Park to give us a plan. I mean, they gave us a plan, as you may recall, they gave us a plan that was not a bid in August. It was after we were on the street, after we'd gone through a couple deadlines and they missed them, and so we just kept going. But we have, I believe a $1 million is a fair price, highest and best use over what we specify. But
Hold on a second. Are you talking about 402?
I'm talking about 405.
Okay.
I'm stuck on 405.
Okay.
Because I think we should control it, and I think that's what we want. But I believe that we should also get a clear statement from the town on the added value issues. And we've tried to do that in the past, and we haven't gotten clarity. So I think the town's cost of retaining a planning consultant, at one point, they did put some number there, $100,000. I think there should be an estimate in their proposal to us of an initial phase of what this would mean. If they want to acquire this for park purposes, there's the planning piece, that's a value, that's a cost to them right away. There's probably, knowing the way this town likes to proceed cautiously, there's probably some phasing. So what's in the first phase? Is there signage? Are there benches? Are there, widening some of those trails, making them safe? They got the, if they buy it, they got the liability. So they want to run people over those trails and make sure that they got safe conditions. And then I believe we should also be talking to them about shared use of Shattuckon and Orangen fields, which are adjacent to this, for community sports teams. And with the town picking up at least part of, or maybe all of the maintenance, contributing or sharing with the ongoing costs. And I think back to, I got this picture of the property from Supervisor Barrett. He didn't take the picture. Some parent took a picture because I think they're lacrosse. These fields are being used for lacrosse. These are behind Shattuckon and Orangen. And I'm pretty good at growing grass. This doesn't count as good grass for kids to be playing on. And I think the town has previously accepted responsibility for working with the booster clubs or whatever, the parents groups, to make sure that you're providing good facilities, safe facilities for kids. And that tremendous field that we have between those two schools is not used a lot when school's out. It's not used, and but it's used by these leagues and everybody else. So I would say, since that's adjacent to that, part of this deal ought to be that we have collaboration. I think the public expects it. I think they don't see the Shen stovepipe and the town stovepipe. We're serving the same kids. So I can get to the part that, what helps us with the kids. But I think, on top of that, we ought to have a clear restriction on this, a covenant that this can only be used for public use, and that leads me to 405. I believe that when you talk about how we should go, and piggyback on what you said, I think each board, both the town and this is a presumption, and I think this is a small presumption, that the town's going to give us a proposal. I absolutely believe we're going to get a proposal. We're going to get some response in the next couple days. And I think each board should appoint 2 members to collaboratively start talking about this, put parameters around this, bounce some ideas off. And 2 members from each side don't make a quorum on either side. And they allow a process that you have to go back to the ranch and sell it and get approval. And you work your way through this. I think the public expects that. They expect the collaboration. They expect the cooperation. And they expect, Bob, to use your term, concrete actions. And I think getting together would be actions. I agree that we need to say, give us something that we can start the process with. But I think over the long term, written offers and counter offers going back and forth, we'd be much better off having some people sit around the table, talk their way through this.
Quick question. We have people sitting around the table, 2 from us, 2 from them.
Yep.
Who's going to manage that meeting? There's got to be some unified person that says, that controls the flow back and forth. Do we acquiesce, give it to them, or would they acquiesce and give it to us? To me, that's something you have to figure out. How do you run this so
we
that
own the property?
Okay.
That's what I think. Today we own the property, so I think the seller controls that condition. But I think we do it in a cooperative spirit. I think it's doable. I don't think it's something we've done a lot of.
Is that a public or a private meeting?
I think it's a private. I think it's a private meeting.
I mean, a couple of things. I guess there's a difference. We're public entities. And so we have working meetings on different things to get to a point where we have public discussion. The board meeting is a meeting of the board in public, not a public meeting. Same thing with the town meeting. And we've had different, whatever, we just finished talking about the potential grant piece, collaboration. It was a faster collaboration than not. So we've had collaboration with different towns, be it Half Moon, Clifton Park, otherwise. So one of the things I think that what we don't want to do now is get so far into the weeds of that versus the broader concept. And I think the broader concept speaks to the 3 options that were shared, and they were shared. So for one, that the board knows, so I didn't have to do this necessarily for the board's information. I did it to make sure that there were any questions to clarify because the board had information. But it's also important for the public to know that there are legal conditions, stipulations that drive what we ultimately do. It's not who likes what, who speaks louder, who screams most. There's a process. And a part of that process is engaging in those conversations. And part of the process is a formal outreach by the town to say, okay, we are. And if you read the correspondence, I said that I'll be more than happy to help facilitate things. And I'm assuming, again, I'm not going to speak to Supervisor Barrett. I'm assuming that if this is something that, and I don't know how they function, but the town board actually functions a lot differently than a school board and even from a governance perspective. But at some point, that's the reason why I was very deliberate in sharing the correspondence also with each town board member, because if it's going to be a collaborative conversation, all parties need to be privy to the same information in order for us to have a fair conversation. And so at some point, or if or when there's outreach to say, yeah, we have an interest in, it could be some verbalization, but at the end of the day, it has to be something concrete that this board as a body has to say, you know what, we're comfortable enough with it to either want to get a majority vote or ideally get a unanimous vote on it as we move forward. I think that we're using some terms interchangeably, but probably coming back to the same thing in terms of fair value and market value. And I use the term all the time, what's the value proposition? Because there's a benefit in getting cash, but there's also a benefit in doing things that will save us costs or provide some value add that we didn't have moving forward. And so all those things have to be considered. And so to say one thing is better than another at this point is, purely speculative, but I think we're all saying the same thing. We want to make sure that at the end of the day, we get a certain, from a cash perspective, something monetary-wise that we think, okay, this is reasonable, and I think everyone has been saying the same thing, that we can then dedicate that those funds, coupled with other funds, if necessary, we can then more aggressively continue to pursue the purchase of land, because these two things are related, but they're not interconnected to the point we can't do one without the other. I mean, it's choice in terms of what provides the best impact, or should I say the least impact on voters and the best financial situation for the district, all things being considered. So I think the exchange here is good because we can talk through, and just like most decision that's worthwhile, you're going to go through iterations of it to the finally when you come down to, because I think conversation we have in here today on as we sit on the 25th of April could be very different than a conversation that we could be sitting on May 25th after having some documents in hand and saying, what does this mean for us as a school district? What does this mean for us moving forward? And so it's healthy, but I think what we can't do is fall into the trap of thinking this is the only way versus let's see what the options present and analyze the options as they present themselves.
Yeah, I don't think we're on different pages. I like your term working group. I mean, that may be better than, that's how we do things. And that's how we do things with the town. That's how we did it with the previous grant, when we had to bring things together. But we receive something, we're not going to receive something, we say, oh, that's it. I mean, there needs to be a back and forth. What do they need? What do we need? That's put on the table, and I think if it's done at a working group level, it doesn't pin down either board. It's representatives, and they come back with a recommendation. And I think, presuming we get a letter from the town of Clifton Park in some proposal form, then I think that's the time that we
Get more in depth.
To point that and go forward.
I agree. I like the idea of a working group. I think that makes sense to have, and I think 2 is probably a good number on both sides. So, and personally, I'm more than happy to be one of the 2 people for that. I'd be more than willing to sit down and objectively look at all that. So, I like the idea.
Good. Well, I hope the information shared was helpful to the board, and I hope that it dispels some of the misunderstanding that people have about process. And clearly, I think tonight the conversation demonstrate that this board is having what I call some of those crucial conversations, and stand ready to listen and engage, and do it in a way that's fair to all parties. Because at the end of the day, we do, in fact, represent 6 municipalities, 9,800 kids, and their respective families, friends, and otherwise. And so I think that's that fairness factor, if you want to use that term, that we always have to come back to. And that's why even the public referendum speak talking about the merit of the sale. It has to be something that, quite frank with you, people may want this or may want this, but there has to be what I call, always kind of come back to the objective realm, that objectively, this doesn't give all the who wants the outliers exactly what they want, but people looking at it saying this fair deliberation, all things considering, we address some of our target goals, particularly the potential purchase of property, and something that quite frankly, next conversation at some point, I would say won't happen until probably summertime, is to articulate an aggressive plan to, again, putting on our boots, this time putting on boots, and yeah, literally putting on your boots and looking at some property, because there are a few different properties identified right now, some that we've identified in the past, some new properties that people have said, hey, I have, but we'll see when we get to that point. So I share that with you because I think it's just important that people know that the turning the page isn't turning the page in a split perspective, but turning the page in the perspective of let's make sure that what we're doing was right and fair for the district, because that's what this governance board is, the governance board for the district. And I think all the conversation went full circle, came back to the governance board, want to figure out how to engage in that conversation for the district, and not necessarily get caught up, is it $1.2 million, $1.3 million, $1.4 million? At this point, we'll see what the value proposition is, because there's some things that could add some tremendous value that, 6 and 1/2 does another in terms of costs, repurposing, things of that nature that we can potentially look at. But those are things that, again, we don't know until we get to that point. At least we'll be open to having that conversation. And so the ball is truly, that's why I committed last time, and I wanted to do it and share with the board. Wanted to let the town know we want to engage, and that's why this conversation is important. That, for people want to say the district should. Well, the district is doing what the district can and should do, but it takes two to tango. And so we have the music, we have the dance floor, and the door is open.
Any other comments, questions, concerns? Okay.
Just two items. I just want to the BOCES budget vote, Mr. Delat already mentioned, so I don't need to provide any additional explanation to that.
Okay. Let's proceed with the action items. Motion on the BOCES vote. Mr. Casey, second, Mrs. Stevenson. Any comments, questions?
Thank you to Gary for serving.
So we voting for Gary as well, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Gary, do you have a recommendation on actually, we're doing.
They're all incumbents.
All incumbents.
In 4 spots.
Yeah.
Four and
Yeah,
four, so
they're-
yeah.
They're,
So 4 and 4.
they're fine people. They really are.
All right, so voting 4 and 4.
All in favor?
Or maybe it's 3 and 0. I just want to explain real quick this last one because there was a question asked. Jessica Leahy is an author to a very pretty popular book, and we have a lot of people reading that book now, The Gift of Failure. And Paul Ripchick, actually, this was initiated by one of the counselors at high school, Jan Riley, who probably about a couple years ago started reading this book and using it as part of her dialogue. And now we have a lot of teachers at different levels reading this book now. It's kind of been a good book study book, so to speak. And so they have gone out and fundraised. They have collaboration with the town of Clifton Park Library, the local what's the name? New Country, and looking to also generate some additional funds from the foundation. And since we have 2 votes here on the foundation, I expect that it could be positive. And since there is a PD focus for the district, we'll contribute some with that PD focus on it. So it's a combination of things, and will be used for some PD for teachers, and then a parent community night. So we think this is a good opportunity to do something that's a little bit different than we have done in the past in terms of the community parent engagement piece, and provide some resources. We anticipate it'll be a big draw, because this book is not only good with popular teachers, but popular with parents. And so we anticipate that'll be a pretty large draw from across the community. The big piece they're going to have to figure out is how do you try to contain it?
It's the night before.
Yeah,
school.
the timing was just
that was nutty. Yeah,
the
that
timing
the
was
only thing.
availability kind of thing, and they debated with that. Trust me, I think we'll still get a significant. Probably that might be a good thing because it may limit it to the 800 capacity that we have in the auditorium. So it may not be a bad thing to have it then.
Motion, Mr. Gilbert, second, Mr. Rajat. Any other comments, questions? Okay, all in favor? One comment from Gary. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think most people got this today. advertisement for the NISBA convention.
Lake Placid.
It's in Lake Placid. That's great, but housing is limited. So I really urge us to get a stick
Vanessa, isn't it? Vanessa?
Yeah, so,
and register as early as possible, and
So-
that would be June the 15th, because otherwise we
Yeah.
wind up in Lower Slobovia.
so I would say, recognize people have to look at schedules and calendar, and clearly, Mr. Casey's based upon, on May 15th. And so some point within the month of May, if people, certainly earlier the better, get to Vanessa so we can be ready to hit send. Yeah, so right after, to make sure we know who, because whomever, we will have at least one new board member. So we want to engage that person in the process as well. So, yeah, I'm glad you brought up, Mr. Flato, because that is a big concern. I know my colleagues are talking about the same thing too, that people who have typically sent 6 or 7 board members are thinking that maybe they only have 1 or 2 because of the hotel constraints.
Bob, I just have one other comment.
Go ahead.
I just want to stress again, the Green and White Gala is June 9th on a Friday night. So put that on your calendars, please. And we changed up the venue, Dr. Robinson, I mentioned before, it's going to Glenn Sanders, same timing. But this year, we did change the venue, we took it out of Clifton Park, so very important that we,
Payment,
and our payment link is up now.
I don't know, have you tried it?
I looked at it, it worked when I clicked on it, but I don't know if
Okay.
Jim got it to where it needs to be yet.
Okay. Good.
Anything else? All right, motion to adjourn, Mr. Casey, second, Mr. Gilbert, all in favor?